The Murder Scene podcast is a show that may contain graphic descriptions of violent acts, including those of a sexual nature and bad language. If you feel you may be adversely affected by such content, please do not listen. Listener discretion is strongly advised, not intended for children. Hello and welcome to The Murder Scene, a podcast where we delve into the darker side of human nature to explore murders, missing persons, cold cases, serial killers, and all manner of strange, mysterious happenings that fall into the case file marked true crime. I'm your host, Alex. So, hop into the back of my creepy white van filled with grey tarps and duct tape and let's go! The Murder Scene podcast, episode number 6, part 2, King of the Murder Castle, America's first serial killer H. Holmes, the torture doctor. Even before the Murder Castle was built in Chicago, across the ocean in 1888 in Whitechapel, a rundown shithole in London's poverty-stricken East End, a man was murdering women, sometimes removing organs, sometimes not, but each time brutally slaying his victim. Even back then, there was a gutter press who agreed with today's media epithet of, if it bleeds, it leads, and endlessly published every single morbid, explicit, blood-dripping detail, including illustrations of the horrible murders that still fascinate and obsess us more than 130 years later. Jeff Mudgett is a former trial lawyer and just happens to be the great-great-grandson of H. Holmes. He believes wholeheartedly that his ancestor was none other than Jack the Ripper. He believes that Holmes's experience of killing on the streets of London, being interrupted, being almost caught more than once, led him to kill his final Ripper victim inside her home, and that this predicament may have sparked the inspiration for the Murder Castle, a sanctuary for his schemes and scams and murder plans, a place where he could kill with abandon, kill at his leisure, without fear of getting caught. In his own safe haven, he could avoid the slash-and-grab style he'd used previously, just cutting out an organ right quick and fleeing. He needn't rush if he had his own murder mansion, his own place to take time to soften the skin and the flesh of his victims with lye, to make flaying and filleting them easier. And he could do it slowly. He could savor it this way. He could wallow in the blood and the guts, have time to gaze, fascinated by the beauty of the human anatomy, and gasp at the first glint of white bone underneath all that glistening wet red. I can just imagine his excitement when the seed of the idea for the Murder Castle was planted in his mind, perhaps in the bone-freezing, cold, dark streets of Victorian London, where it could be hard to see your own hand in front of your face in the thick, choking fog, and I just know he would have been in absolute awe of his own genius on its completion, and the satisfaction he would have felt after his first leisurely, low-key killing in the Murder Castle. There's some quite compelling evidence, although most of it circumstantial, that lends some authenticity to Mudgett's claims. Recently, though, there's been DNA testing done on a shawl that belonged to Ripper victim Catherine Eddowes, and apparently the results conclusively link the DNA to one of the prime Ripper suspects, Aaron Kosminski. Case closed? I don't think so. Something else I find extremely interesting about the correlations between H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper is the existence of an organization in Chicago founded in 1889, 1 year after the Ripper murders in London, the Whitechapel Club. The Whitechapel Club? What? I love little parallels like this. Brings out the murderino in me. Yeah, it doesn't take much, I know. So, the Whitechapel Club, named after Jack the Ripper's stomping grounds in London, was founded in 1889 by a small group of newspaper men in Chicago. It didn't last very long, only until around 1894. Although the founders were newsmen, members also included artists, musicians, doctors, and lawyers. The club had a few prestigious members. Brand Whitlock, an American writer of fiction and non-fiction, a journalist and a politician who was elected mayor 4 times of Toledo, Ohio, and was a U.S. ambassador to Belgium under President Woodrow Wilson. George Ade, a syndicated columnist, librettist, and playwright. He became recognized for his use of the common, everyday person as the focus of his plays, and used common vernacular from the streets of Chicago. And Finley Peter Dunne, American writer, journalist, and humorist, who was a born and bred Chicagoan who worked for the city's staple newspapers, the Herald, the Tribune, and the Times. The Whitechapel Club headquarters looked more like a serial killer's trophy room than a gentleman's clubhouse. There was a collection of actual murder weapons, nooses and knives that they procured from a policeman friend. A blanket on display was covered in the blood of Great Sioux Nation tribal members, photographs of pirates who had been beheaded. The wall lights were human skulls, where a gas flame danced behind the empty eye sockets, and the bar in the center of the room was a coffin of a member who committed suicide. They had used it to transport his body to Lake Michigan, where they built a funeral pyre on the Indiana dunes, and set his corpse on fire whilst they slammed shots and sang a solemn dirge to the departed, carrying flaming torches and wearing black ceremonial robes like a mob of mages in the moonlight. A very interesting group of gentlemen, of course, so no girls allowed, naturally. If I can find enough source info on the Whitechapel Club, I'd love to do an episode entirely on them. In the future, I may do a Jack the Ripper episode or two, but you all know the story as well as I do, some of you probably more so I want to do something a little different if I do. I'm going to wander down some dark side streets to see what I can find. I'll definitely dive into the disinfo given out by the London police that all the victims were prostitutes. Just something that irks me about the case. Not that there's anything that should predispose anybody to being the victim of a murderer, and not that I disparage sex workers. I emphatically do not. But just the fact that this was used as a tool by the police to keep the lid on the potential public hysteria over the murders has always bothered me. Anywho, back to Herman Mudgett. Throughout his youth, Herman had collected and kept boxes of little treasures. Things like the first tooth he lost, a photograph of a childhood sweetheart, those sorts of innocent trinkets we all love to keep forever and reminisce over from time to time. And he travelled everywhere with them. But Herman's treasure troves may have contained mementos of a much darker nature. People who knew Mudgett as a child said he had a habit of dissecting small forest creatures while they were still alive. He would keep some of their bones in the little keepsake boxes next to the baby teeth and trinkets. If this is true, it's hardly a surprise, though. It's classic psychopathic childhood behavior. Christ, even Jeffrey Dahmer had the decency to kill them first. But there was darkness, too, inside the childhood home of Herman Mudgett. His religious zealot parents punished every single little childhood mishap and mistake he made. This always ended with Herman getting 7 shades of shit knocked out of him by his father. Then they both proceeded to pray over him and lock him in the attic for an entire day, and not allow him to talk or eat. That explains a lot. Another interesting vignette from Mudgett's childhood involved a roaming photographer with a very pronounced limp who came to Gilmanton and stuck around for a while. Young Herman would run errands for the man, and one such day he asked him to stop by the local wagon maker, handing him a block of wood. He needed a new one, just like it. Herman obliged and returned some time later with the brand new one. As he arrived back at the man's home, he witnessed him, half-dressed, taking off one of his legs. That was the purpose of the new block of wood, a weight for his prosthetic limb. Herman had never seen anything like this in his entire life, and the experience stuck with him. Decades later, Holmes remarked, "Had he proceeded to remove his head in the same way, I should not have been further surprised." You can see from his early experiences, the ones that left a lasting impression, all involved the human body in some way. The skeleton incident, the wooden leg incident, his job as Dr. White's assistant performing post-mortems and dissections of corpses. See the pattern here? When Herman began working, despite his lack of experience in being just 16 years old, he landed a job as a teacher, even although he was still only a child himself. The job was right there in his hometown of Gilmanton. He moved on after a while, to Alton, still in New Hampshire. This was the town where he met his long-suffering wife, Clara Lovering. He was just 18 years old when they met, and she had never met a man like him in her life. He excited her. He made her heart race and her face flush, made her think of things she'd never even imagined, and she desired him in a way that she had never experienced before. The couple eloped and were married on Independence Day, 1878, and for a short while they were a young, happy, passionate newlywed couple deeply in love with each other. But soon the shine wore off, at least for Herman, and he left his wife behind, moved on from her, and went off to further his education. At age 19, Mudgett planned on attending Dartmouth College, but decided to go straight to medical school instead. The University of Vermont in Burlington did not suit him, and he moved on after just 1 year and enrolled in the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. It was one of the Midwestern states' premier med schools, which specialized in dissection, something that was already a passion and an obsession, and would soon become a business for him. It was in his first year here that Mudgett began his career as a conman, while working as a traveling salesman in Northwest Illinois. He didn't hand over the money he made on the book sales and pocketed the whole lot, then returned to school in Michigan. Of that period in his life, Holmes later said, "I could hardly count my Western trip a failure, for I had seen Chicago." His school career didn't exactly inspire, and he was a mediocre student at best, but graduated in 1884 despite that fact, and set out to find a place he could set up his own medical practice. Again, Mudgett took a job as a traveling salesman, this time for a nursery in Portland, Maine. He ended up in a town in New York called Moores Forks, where the trustees of the local grade school board employed him as a principal. He stuck at it until he finally managed to open his doctor's office. Any place that Mudgett landed, disturbing events would follow in his wake. At the medical school he attended, he had left a broken-hearted widow behind, weeping and wailing over his unfulfilled promises to her. And in the town he had chosen to set up his medical practice, a little boy people claimed they had last seen with Mudgett vanished. His explanation was that the boy had simply returned home to Massachusetts. The police looked no further into the child's disappearance. It was inconceivable that the dapper doctor with the gift of the gab, who could charm birds out of trees, women out of their knickers, and could sell ice to Eskimos, could ever do something as abjectly evil as hurt a defenseless child. And Mudgett'd be like, yeah, hold my beer. One night, under cover of darkness, Herman slipped out of his lodgings without settling up with the landlord. He headed to Philadelphia this time. His plan was to find a drugstore that he could worm his way into being a partner in, or even end up owning it. His quest was unsuccessful, and he ended up settling for a position as a keeper in an insane asylum. It wasn't much fun, and even a psychopath like Holmes could not abide how horrendous a job it was. He even later claimed that he had nightmares about some of the patients for years afterward. He only managed to tolerate it for a few days. Who could blame him? After a while, he did find a drugstore like he originally wanted to. But again, right off the bat, shit happens around him, and a child died after ingesting medication purchased at the pharmacy. And surprise, surprise, he flees. This time, he headed to Chicago, and was disappointed to find that he would have to be licensed to work as a dispensing pharmacist in the state of Illinois. He would have to undergo a written exam in Springfield, and he did, under the name of H. Holmes. That's it for part 2. See you in the next one. Go to themurderscene.com or at the Murder Scene Podcast on YouTube for all our social media links. For a full list of research sources and credits, please see the show notes below if you're listening to a podcast, or see the end credits if you're watching a video. See you next week.